distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor and privilege for me to be hosting the first International Global Peace Economic Forum here in Seoul, on the heels of the historic 70th year anniversary of Korea's liberation from Japanese colonial occupation. This is a momentous time for the Korean people. It is a moment of inflection where tremendous change could come. Whether that change be good or bad is dependent on the actions that we take today. In this regard, I would like to thank all of you for your participation and your leadership in shaping the future of this land, this region, Asia, and the world. I would like to give special thanks to Honorable Kim Jin-pyo, Deputy Prime Minister of Strategy and Finance, the Honorable Park Tae-dong, Member of the National Assembly, and Dr. Kim Joo-hyun, Head of the Subcommittee of Economy with Presidential Committee for the Unification Preparation, for helping us to organize this event. Could we give them a round of applause? I would also like to acknowledge our illustrious foreign dignitaries, President and very good friend, Vinicia Cerezo, and another very good friend of mine from another continent, Prime Minister Raila Odinga. Could we give them a round of applause? For joining us here today, as well as countless other dignitaries, too many to mention, that are concerned about the peace and welfare of the Korean people. You have our eternal thanks and gratitude. Let us give all of them a warm round of applause. As I have mentioned, we are gathered at a special moment in the history of the Korean people. Although the peninsula is still divided, new winds of change are shaping this land and the region, making the promise of unification ever more real. The recent trips of President Park Geun-hye to China, where she was warmly received by President Xi Jinping, together with her September 28th address to the UN General Assembly, suggest the changing geopolitical relationships in this region. It suggests a growing international consensus that South Korea should lead the issue of peaceful unification. The old Cold War lineup is fast dissolving. Of the North's historic backers, the Soviet Union is no longer in existence, and China is rethinking its policies toward the peninsula. I outlined these changes in the third chapter of my book, The Korean Dream, A Vision for a United Korea, published in the fall of last year. There I give a new perspective for unification by going beyond the Cold War paradigm that have governed the regional relationships over the past 3 decades and shaped the six-party talks. Paramount to this new thinking is the focus on outcome of unification rather than the incremental processes to unite the peninsula, without a clear consensus as to what a unified future might bring. In addition to this new framework, I emphasize the importance of engaging the Korean people in driving this issue forward with the support of the international community. Instead of it being driven purely by the two Korean governments in the North and South. This bottom-up approach necessitates the articulation of Korea's historic identity and destiny in line with the Hongik-ingan ideal, and in so doing, reminds all Koreans that the last 7 decades is but a moment in the long arc of our history, which has spanned 5 millennia. I learned firsthand the failures of the Sunshine Policy more than two decades ago, when my father, the Reverend Dr. Sun Myung-moon, became the first person to open the door to North Korea. What followed was more a failure of the South than the duplicity of the Kim regime. All manner of South Korean entities made a mad dash to the north without any coherent overarching strategy, and often at cross purposes with each other. This lack of vision and clarity about the outcomes of engagement allowed the Kim regime to survive and later fund their nuclear program. Today, however, things have changed dramatically. We have the lessons of our past, changing geopolitical dynamics, and more importantly, through the efforts of those engaged in this conference, a growing consensus in the South around the vision I outlined in my book. Under the banner of Action for Korea United and the One Dream, One Korea campaign, we have gathered all of Korea's representative religions, over 700 civic organizations, with more joining by the day. Representatives from both political parties, which has been a first, and with a new unification song campaign, a growing number of student and youth groups throughout the South. For the first time since 1945, a new movement for unification, united around the singular vision, the Korean Dream, is gaining momentum in the South and spreading its appeal to the diaspora community in Japan, the United States, China, and Russia, as well as other parts of the world. For the 70th year anniversary of independence, festivals and conferences were held in these nations with key local partners to celebrate Korean solidarity and on unification. This momentum will crescendo with tomorrow's event in the World Cup Stadium in front of more than 50,000 young people and televised nationally on SBS. This movement carries the spirit of the independence movement of the last century, with the promise of opening a new chapter of Korean leadership in this one. For me, the unification issue and subsequent creation of a new nation has always been a lifelong dream and aspiration that has run throughout my family. My great-granduncle had been an activist for Korean independence and one of the drafters of the Declaration of Independence during the March protests of 1919. My father later carried that torch with his historic trip in 1991 to the north, opening relations between the two Koreas, in addition to his various business and peace initiatives on the peninsula. It is within this context that I would like to address the theme of building the 21st century economic model for a unified Korea. As momentum builds for the creation of a new unified nation, it is crucial that the South prepares itself to lead the greatest merger in human history up until this point. German unification will pale in contrast to the opportunities and challenges afforded by Korean unification. First, it will offset the intrinsic macroeconomic problems of both economies, as the two parts of Korea have exactly what the other needs for sustainable growth. Although integration of the opposing political, social, and economic systems will not be easy. Secondly, it will end the security issue on the peninsula and in the region, especially the nuclear threat and the risk of proliferation. That will be the stimulus for regional growth and prosperity with global implications. That is why it is absolutely critical to make sure the health of the South Korean economy can support such an integration. The South's institutions today, from the government to the business sector, need to honestly assess whether they have the experience, capability, and capacity of leading the unification process. Successful economic integration will be the most important component of unification, since it will support all the other initiatives in integrating the political and social life of the two Koreas. As a result, old methods and outdated paradigms must give way to a more dynamic model that is forward-looking and growth-oriented. The South's meteoric rise over the last 70 years was fueled by the growth of chaebols and the government policies that supported them. It had its place in the 1970s and 80s when, as an emerging economy, the South needed to build scale in key strategic industries. Yet, in today's mature domestic market, that same structure is no longer a benefit, as it is unable to generate enough jobs, allow innovation and flexibility, or to fuel growth. Most importantly, it stifles competition, which is the engine of a dynamic economy. This sad reality is reflected in the undervalued price of Korean assets in the global capital markets. As such, economic reform is critical. Otherwise, the outdated economic structures of the South will face tremendous challenges in trying to support the unification process. The time to rethink an effective economic strategy with its structural implications is now, well before unification. Much needs to be done. Despite many successes and accomplishments today, South Korea is still plagued with problems that are preventing its economy from unlocking its full potential. The significant unemployment rate of those in their 20s to 30s is a case in point. Korea's greatest asset is its well-educated and hard-working workforce. While the South boasts one of the highest education standards of all the developed nations, it also has one of the highest unemployment rates in this age group at over 10%, the highest since 1999. This is even more troubling when one juxtaposes this reality to the shrinking youth demographic in the South. Even with this shrinking youth demographic, the capacity of South Korean business to provide jobs and opportunities that many capable young people need is strained to the max. I believe this is directly attributable to the crony capitalism that gave rise to the chaebols, and then the subsequent rise of the countervailing, militant, organized labor movements here in the South. The result has been an environment in which new capital creation is next to impossible. In general, the economic landscape needs to provide a level playing field with simpler laws, fewer regulations, and easier access to capital for everyone, and not just a privileged few. Engaging more Koreans in capital creation will stimulate the South's economic engine far beyond current levels and create the necessary jobs and opportunities, not only for the South, but also for the North. Economic reforms to unleash the South's true potential should be made a national priority as a prerequisite to advancing the issue of unification between the two governments. This is a problem that the South can and must fix if it is to be healthy enough to lead the unification process. Today, a handful of chaebols dominate the South's economic landscape. Ironically, the IMF legacy from the turn of the century has centralized the control of the nation's economy into the hands of fewer chaebols than pre-IMF levels. I am sure this was not envisioned by the government and business leaders of the 1970s and 80s that implemented this current system. Accounting for nearly all of Korean GDP today, chaebols dominate all facets of economic life, hoarding profits and squeezing suppliers while stifling the growth of smaller businesses that employ 90% of Korean labor. Consumers are shortchanged by the lack of competition, which naturally leads to price manipulation and the corruption that follows with excessive consolidation of power in one group. Most of all, the nation suffers and is held hostage to the whims of a small, few elite group of chaebol families, suppressing opportunity, innovation, entrepreneurialism, and even hindering economic growth. Growing negative sentiment toward the chaebols and their archaic legacy speaks volumes to the reality that the status quo must change. This sentiment has a harmful effect on all other stakeholders in the economy, as it leads to an anti-business environment at large. In this landscape, the chaebols do fine, since they control the economy and the political class. Yet it creates huge barriers to entry for any smaller player or entrepreneur, since they lack the resources and the connections to navigate the treacherous labor market and regulatory terrain, as well as the bloated and corrupt government bureaucracy in the pockets of the chaebols. In other words, it makes it next to impossible for the average citizen to have the opportunity to participate in the economy as a capital creator instead of a cog in the established chaebol pipeline. For someone like me who grew up in the United States, this is anathema to the ideals of the free market and capitalism. The goal of government should be to ensure that there is truly a level playing field for all its citizens. Its politics should provide opportunity for everyone and not a few elite. Beyond that, it should not involve itself in the markets. In order to address these problems, we need to envision a new economic paradigm. Strangely, despite the end of the military dictatorship and the beginning of democratization, the South economy has remained trapped in its old structures, even while political life has undergone major significant change. Liberalization of the political system should be followed by liberal reforms in the economy to ensure opportunity for all Koreans. With a new mindset, we should seek solutions that can unlock the potential of the Korean people and free them to be doing what they naturally excel at. That is, innovate, take risk, explore uncharted opportunities, and work hard to be successful. I believe the most effective and critical path toward that paradigm is to challenge and reform the current systemic limitations in the financial industry and the related government regulatory systems. In principle, when capital is allowed to flow unhindered by unnecessary regulation or policy into economic opportunities, great things begin to happen. Free markets governed by the laws of supply and demand naturally fill any need, like the balancing of high and low pressure systems in the atmosphere. It is the most efficient way of dispersing the necessary capital for the needed opportunity, leading to greater capital creation. That is why Korean financial institutions, with the support of government policies, should not merely sit on their trillions of dollars of excess cash, but should employ and deploy a greater portion of that capital toward financing new growth and opportunity, thereby making their money work harder for all its shareholders, especially the Korean citizens. In doing so, they would be investing in the future of the Korean economy, as well as helping to liberalize it so that the brightest and most talented could achieve their dreams outside the chaebol pipeline, thus breaking the monopoly hold of the chaebols in the Korean economy. With easier access to capital, just imagine how many new startups there could be here in the South. This will lead to reforms in the financial sector that will subsequently stimulate its expansion with the growth of private equity and investment banking outside traditional banking structures. This, in turn, will stimulate other industries, especially the technology sector. The greatest challenge for any startup is capital. But with new access to funding, who will be the next neighbor? Down Kakao or Coupon. The sky is the limit. In addition to stimulating technological innovation, it will create greater market discipline in the traditional industrial sector. Inefficiently run companies will be the natural targets of mergers, LBOs, and acquisitions, as easier capital accumulation will allow those disciplinary pressures to be felt, as was the case in the Western democracies. This should lead to greater transparency, governance, and efficiency in the markets to the benefit of the shareholders, the Korean people, and this nation. Similarly, South Korean financial institutions should leverage those reforms to proactively seek growth opportunities internationally. First, to secure markets, raw materials, and investments, and secondly, to establish global leadership. Korea is already a mature market, and the data clearly show that the Korean economy is battling low growth and low inflation. Korea's long-term viability and growth hinge on the financial sector facilitating growth abroad, which in turn will tie those markets to Korea. However, Korean financial institutions today remain notoriously bureaucratic, inefficient, and risk-averse, unable to function effectively in connecting capital with opportunities, both domestically and abroad. In comparison, while not perfect, the US and European counterparts undeniably excel at capitalizing on unique growth opportunities. They always look beyond current markets and situations from which they safely operate, and constantly seek the necessary tools to bridge existing limitations and restrictions. This predisposition to pioneer while managing risk leads to win-win outcomes for all shareholders as the pie grows and values are maximized. As an example of Korean financial institutions' general reluctance and inability to pursue well-managed growth opportunities, I would like to cite the Paraguayan case in particular. In the early 2000s, Paraguay was an environment of major political and economic uncertainty, making it a textbook example of a place unfit for foreign investment. However, beginning with my work there in 2008, together with the GlobalPeace Foundation, we have taken deliberate and strategic steps to manage various political and social risk factors, whereby the nation has undergone a significant transformation and has now become an attractive yet untapped market that is primed for substantial returns. In 2008, I personally debated with then President Nicanor for almost 2 hours, arguing that it is ill-advised for him to expropriate foreign-owned assets for short-term political gain. I urged him and the subsequent Paraguayan leadership that they must uphold fundamental universal principles of individual rights to freedom and property, and that the rule of law must be respected by everyone for the nation to attract foreign direct investment. We formed a think tank to promote stability and long-term view of governance, guided by principles-based policies. This approach stands in stark contrast to many Latin American nations that have created policies around personalities and regimes. Our institute now serves as the most respected and influential voice in Paraguay and works in partnership with institutions such as the Heritage Foundation to help Paraguay progress even further. In the end, we have effectively mitigated what many would call country risk through my various social programs and conferences on good governance. Moreover, we have planted a vision for Paraguay as a gateway and hub for Latin America, much like Switzerland, Singapore, or Dubai, where it becomes a center of diverse distribution, industrial, financial, and legal services for the region. With a strategic location, abundant natural resources, low cost of energy, low taxes, favorable investment laws, stable political institutions, and a young labor force, Paraguay has become a hidden gem. Yet, with all those economic considerations aside, what makes Paraguay even more important for Korea, from my perspective, is that it becomes a test case where Korea can raise a third world nation which was considered the basket case of Latin America to first world status. And in the process, gain the experience within their institutions and their government to actually bring a third world nation to first world status, which will naturally be the ability that Korea will need when unification comes. Yet, this is where I have hit a wall when speaking with the heads of Korean financial institutions about the exciting opportunities in Paraguay. I actually met with all the leading banks and bankers. And they lay the responsibility squarely on the South Korean government's policy for their inability to take action. In stark contrast to the smart monies of Europe, Latin America, and even China that are moving into Paraguay, Korean financial institutions seem incapable of overcoming their current limitations. Systemic problems, as well as bureaucratic mindset that plague all government institutions, have prevented them from taking bold, innovative steps to capitalize on obvious opportunities as they opt for safe mediocrity over value maximization. The Korean government needs to step in and support the financial institutions to make their capital far more competitive and global in reach. Government policies must be revised to remove barriers and constraints due to outdated models, to liberalize financial markets, and to incentivize investments that promote growth. China, for example, is not sitting idle. Its government-backed investment dollars are hard at work internationally, taking advantage of as many growth opportunities as they can handle. Our government should also follow suit and commit substantially increasing foreign direct investments, especially in the underdeveloped markets, and also to provide increased loan guarantees and insurance mechanisms to help bridge the gap between developing markets and Korean capital. Ladies and gentlemen, Korea stands at a crossroads. Rooted in our founding aspirations, we have an opportunity to reinvent Korea based on the best models from the East and West, as well as the past and the present. As Korea moves towards unification, this 21st century paradigm for economic development will allow the unified Korea to unlock the latent potential of its greatest asset, the Korean people. The creativity, drive, and heart of our people are our greatest strength. We need to ensure that the culture and the systems of our nation will support the full potential of the Korean people, now and as a unified nation in the near future. As the only nation still divided from the Cold War era, we need to ensure that this new nation is far greater than the one that we are currently living in, both in form and in substance. This will require our best efforts. However, with everyone joining hands, I have no doubt that the unified Korea will truly stand as an inspiring beacon of hope, not only for Asia, but for the world. Thank you very much. May God bless you and your families.
말씀 고맙습니다. 여러분 다시 한번 아주 열정적인 기조사를 펼쳐주신 문현진 세계회장께 큰 박수 부탁드립니다.